Did you know? The original Far Cry started as a project named Exile. Exile took the form of a short, unplayable tech demo that affected the behavior of various dinosaurs in a tropical environment. The series would later return to a prehistoric setting, though in a completely different fashion and in a different prehistoric era. The project took on a more recognizable form by 2002 and was released in 2004. The final game was praised for its graphical fidelity, robust use of real-time physics, and seamless transitions between areas. After the original Far Cry made an impact with its tech, the game's sequel went on to take a very different direction in its design and overall narrative. Far Cry 2, developed by Ubisoft Montreal, was a lot darker, more realistic, and more character-driven than its predecessor. In the lead-up to the game's release in 2008, a blog titled War Unlimited: My Journey Through a War Zone was created as part of the game's marketing campaign. The blog was written by Ruben Olawagembi, a fictional journalist that the player finds in Far Cry 2 itself. In the game, Ruben is writing a book about the Jackal. This Jackal is an arms dealer in an unnamed Central African country and the game's primary antagonist. The blog expands the world of Far Cry 2 by documenting Ruben's journey, his meetings with the Jackal, and some of the atrocities he witnesses along the way. Far Cry 2's final mission takes place in a small area to the southeast of the Bowaseko region. This sector of the map is called Heart of Darkness, explicitly alluding to the novella of the same name written by Joseph Conrad in 1899. In Heart of Darkness, the protagonist, Marlowe, travels up the Congo River to aid an admired ivory trader named Kurtz, who has fallen ill. Despite his respectable status, when Marlowe finds Kurtz, he has gone insane. He beheads people and places their shrunken heads on pikes, takes part in enigmatic rituals, and positions himself as a demigod, exposing the capacity for horrors in the heart of the supposedly civilized man. The parallels between Heart of Darkness and Far Cry 2 are plentiful. The Jackal is an American arms trader who relocated to Africa and profits from prolonging the conflicts between the FLL and the APR. He's also well educated, which is shown when he quotes Friedrich Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil at the start of the game. The player must also travel up a river to reach the Jackal, just as Marlowe did to reach Kurtz. The series would continue to explore sensitive issues with Far Cry 3. Lead writer on Far Cry 3, Jeffrey Yohalem, intended the game to be a commentary on what shooting means and what it does to humanity. The game's protagonist, Jason Brody, is a civilian who's forced to become a killer as the game unfolds. Yohalem told ABC Australia's Good Game, "What happens when that guy is put into a situation where he has to survive minute by minute and save his friends? Will he pick up a gun, and how does that affect him?" Although Far Cry 3 dealt with some serious subject matter, it also showed the team's lighter side. The game has many Easter eggs and references to other games. For instance, after activating a lift, Jason will say, "Would you kindly activate," in an Irish accent. This is a reference to a phrase used by Atlas in 2007's BioShock. Jason also says, "You know, I could use a portal right now," while climbing a missile silo, referencing Portal. In the Far Cry Lost Expeditions DLC, there's a mission called Ignition in the Deep, where Jason must travel to an abandoned military silo. Inside the silo, the player can spot the Abstergo logo and documents that reference Eden and genetic memory. These are all references to the Assassin's Creed franchise. The team's sense of humor continued to show in Far Cry 4. One example is a secret ending the player can trigger during the game's introduction. When Pagan Min leaves his palace, if the player simply follows his instructions and waits in the room for 10 minutes, Min will eventually return. He then takes the player to Lakshmana's shrine, where the game will come to a close. The team wanted the player to be shocked, amazed, and intrigued by antagonist Pagan Min. Min was designed to be charismatic but sadistic, and the team opted for Troy Baker to play the role. According to Baker, he ignored the script Ubisoft gave him during an audition and instead decided to threaten an assistant while still in character. All of a sudden, she walks in. I said, "I'm sorry, who is this? Who is walking into this room right now?" No, don't leave. Sit down. Make yourself comfortable. Would you like some coffee that you brought in? It looks very delicious. Now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to murder her right in front of you. Needless to say, Baker's performance had the impact the team was hoping for. Despite the character's importance, Pagan Min didn't exist in early development. In fact, Ubisoft had considered making Far Cry 4 a direct sequel to Far Cry 3. 3. This sequel would have been set in the same location and served to expand the story of the protagonist. However, Ubisoft quickly realized they didn't want to make a direct sequel. Instead, the team decided to build a brand new game with a new setting and characters. Some team members hoped the game would allow players to fly, which led to the game's verticality. The game's director also wanted the players to be able to ride a rampaging elephant through exotic mountainsides. Some of the gameplay elements were directly taken from Far Cry 3, such as hunting and the freedom to complete missions through different approaches. The game's setting, Karat, is a fictional country in the Himalayas. The developers merge aspects from real-world regions like Nepal and Tibet, but exaggerated those elements for Karat. The game's world was also designed to accommodate new features such as the helicopter and the grappling hook. The developers created an identity for Karat by inventing culture and mythology for the region. In order to make sure this fictional society was believable, the studio sent a team to Nepal to experience and record local culture. According to the developer, the trip changed the game's design. The game's focus shifted from the Nepalese-inspired civil war in the game to an emphasis on unique and interesting characters. The Far Cry series would continue to take place in lush, exotic locations, but the next entry of Far Cry would be much less contemporary. Far Cry Primal is set in the Stone Age, which is an idea that existed as early as Far Cry 3. Though the idea had been floating around for a while, the team wasn't able to make good on the concept while working on Far Cry 3 and 4. A few staff members pitched the idea of Primal to others at Ubisoft. The response was enthusiastic, and development got underway very quickly after Far Cry 4 wrapped up. Having Primal set in the Stone Age brought several challenges with it, however. Hunter-gatherer cultures from that era don't exist anymore, and all they had left behind were fragments of tools and other small details. In order to make the ancient people of Primal as true to life as possible, the team consulted with many experts on prehistory. This included anthropologists Luc Douillon and documentary filmmaker Jacques Malater. Artists would take information from these experts and use it to craft everything from tools and weapons to clothing and ornaments. Early in production, the team experimented with Primal's tribe speaking a more primitive version of English. Actors even read scripts in English, but the dialogue felt noticeably out of place in practice. Ubisoft decided to make 3 primitive languages specifically for the game's tribes instead. Although the languages are fictional, they're based on the ancient Proto-Indo-European language, or Pi for short. Since the game takes place before Pi was likely to exist, the team worked with language experts Andrew and Brenna Bird to craft languages that date back even further than Pi. The team also established 3 distinct sets of body language to complement the proto-languages. Since Primal would likely take place around 10,000 BC, the team decided to set the game in Europe. Lead writer of Far Cry Primal, Kevin Short, told DidYouKnowGaming, "The land of Oros is set near the Danube River. Today, this region is known as Slovakia. We set it here because 12,000 years ago, this was a region of exciting developments. The melting ice helped to create a lush temperate forest that attracted a lot of wildlife and migrating tribes. As they settled in the region, they fought over resources. This led to the development of violent clashes between tribes. The game's reliance on taming animals came naturally from Primal's setting. Early man domesticated wolves into dogs for protection and hunting purposes. So the team decided to make the game's protagonist, Takar, the first human to tame wild beasts. Since there were no guns in the Stone Age, being able to use beasts in addition to the game's prehistoric weapons could keep the game's combat as flexible as other Far Cry games and put emphasis on the series' theme of the prey becoming the predator. Balancing the beasts was complicated, however, as each animal needed to serve a purpose and not be overpowered. Again, the lack of modern technology created a role for the animals. The player can't pull out a pair of binoculars to scout their surroundings, so the owl companion was introduced. It can be used to observe nearby areas without drawing attention. The density of animals in Primal has been roughly doubled from Far Cry 4, adding a lot more activity into the game's systemic open world. This activity is intended to make players feel more vulnerable and remind them that early man wasn't at the top of the food chain. To highlight this theme further, artists made many of the game's humans damaged and disfigured. They have huge scars, burn marks, and even missing limbs, all to show how violent the world of Primal could be. And if you're interested in Far Cry Primal, click the annotation on screen to watch the game's trailer. And if you'd like to hear more of my voice, why don't you check out my video on The Magic School Bus Explores the Human Body.